And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Arnon Dag. So Arnon is a senior scientist in the Institute of Plant Sciences at the Volcanic Institute in Israel. For the last 30 years, Arnon's been working continuously on plant-pollinator interactions. His research focuses examines both pollination demands of horticultural crops and the nutritional demands of pollinators. So with that, Arnon, please take it away.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share our experience in avocado pollination, and especially to focus on honeybee pollination in avocado. First of all, I would like to say a few words about the pioneers in pollination study of avocado in Israel. Professor Shmuel Gazit, unfortunately, passed away 2 years ago. Gadi Sham, which you mentioned earlier, they've done fantastic work to learn about the reproductive biology and pollination of avocado. Professor Dani Zikovic and Dr. Arnon Dag, all of them contribute a lot for the understanding of the importance of pollinators and pollenizers in avocado. The picture up there is from expedition that they have done to Mexico to look for the natural pollinators of avocado. The idea was to bring them to Israel because of all the problem with honeybees. They thought that they will be able to find alternative pollinator. Unfortunately, it didn't succeed. So honeybee are the main pollinator of avocado, as you mentioned. Unfortunately, the avocado bloom is not very attractive to honeybee, and hence they tend to abandon the bloom in favor of competing flora. So we have the avocado, and if we have surround the avocado orchard, citrus or brassica or other attractive bloom, generally the honeybee will tend to abandon the avocado and go to this competing flora. And this is one of the main problems while we are using honeybee for pollination of avocado. And just an example for this is from a study of Gadi Sham and Dani Zikovic in avocado orchard in the Western Galilee, Hass variety. And you can see with a triangle, it represents the flowering of the Hass. So it started around the 12th of April and finished a month later. And if we follow the number of bees on the tree, they actually did not find any bee on the tree until until May 6th. And only towards the end of the blooming period, they found a lot of bees. They reached something like 30 bees per tree, but it was something like last 10% of the flowering. And when they look, and when they look for the yield or for the fruit set, they saw that all the fruit are as a result of this very small, very short period at the end of the blooming. So all the yield was dependent on the bee activity along few days towards the end of the flowering. And when they try to understand what happened, why the bees that did not visit the avocado orchard start to visit on May 6th, they found that the issue was at the end of the citrus flowering. When the citrus finished to flower, the honeybee did not have a good alternative, and they start to visit the avocado. So this shows us a very extreme situation of competition of avocado and how it restricts the honeybee activity in the orchard, and how it can affect fruit set and yield. Generally, the picture is not so dramatic and we see few bees, but in most of the cases, when we come to Hass orchard, we see only few bees per tree. So in general, avocado is not the best or the attractive, highest attractive for the bees. But even more than that, between the different cultivar, Hass attractivity is much lower than many other varieties. If we compare, for example, the number of bee per tree between Hass and Ettinger, we can find sometimes 10 times more bee in the Ettinger comparing the Hass, and it's probably a matter of the amount of nectar. But we ask ourselves, what was the reason that the bee doesn't like avocado? I will come to this point in a few minutes, but the result of this situation that the honeybee do not prefer the avocado bloom is that very low number of flower in our orchard receive sufficient number of pollen grain in the stigma. You can see here in the left side, it's a study of David Pattamore from New Zealand, and in the right side, our study. And the proportion of flowers that receive sufficient number of pollen grain is extremely low. Sufficient number of pollen grain, generally we speak about at least 7 pollen grain per stigma, and the proportion is very, very low, and we can understand it if we see the number of bees that visit the flower. So pollination seems to be very important limiting factor for productivity in avocado. So again, we ask ourselves, what is the reason why the bee doesn't like the avocado flowering? And we evaluated the content of avocado nectar and citrus nectar and avocado honey and citrus honey. And one of the most pronounced difference was the concentration of mineral and especially potassium. You can see that the concentration of potassium in avocado nectar is around 4,000 parts per million, while in citrus it's less than 1/10. It's only 185 parts per million. So with huge difference in potassium concentration. Now the next question we ask ourselves whether it's this high level of potassium affect really the attractiveness for the bee. And we took honey, avocado honey and citrus honey. And the third treatment was citrus honey, in which we mix it with potassium in accordance to the ratio that we can find in avocado honey or nectar. So you can see we tested different salt of potassium, potassium chloride, potassium gluconate, and other salt of potassium. 100% represent the citrus honey consumption. And you can see that always the green bar represents the avocado honey. Always the consumption of the avocado honey was much lower than the citrus honey. And when we added the potassium to the citrus honey, you can see that it reduced the attractiveness of it dramatically. And here in the picture, you can see one of the trial. On the right side, you can see the citrus honey, diluted citrus honey. And here you can see the avocado honey, and here the citrus honey with potassium. So it's very easy to observe that the bee prefer much more the diluted honey that came from citrus, and that they have an issue with the high potassium level in avocado nectar. So we believe that this is one of the main reasons. Lately, we established a fertilization experiment in which we grow avocado tree in containers. We evaluate different level of nitrogen, of phosphorus, but we also evaluate different level of potassium. So we have 10 parts per million potassium and 100 parts per million potassium, and we count the number of bees, and you can see that we have much more bees in the trees that received low level of potassium. So again, this is another indication that the high level of potassium is repelling the bees. So high level of potassium is a major cause for the low attractiveness of honeybee to avocado nectar. So the next question was, can we do something? We say that the honeybee do not like the high level of potassium, but maybe there are strains of honeybees that have a better preference for avocado. And here I would like to mention our experience with Reuven Hofshi. It was something like 25 years ago. He came to Israel for a visit and called me and asked to share with me his experience in his farm, that where he started to bring New World Carniolan bee and suddenly he saw many bees on the trees. And that was the beginning of the study that I'm going to show now, and also the study with the potassium, because before the meeting with Reuven, we didn't work too much on avocado. So this gave us the idea that there is genetic background for the preference of avocado flowering. Now, to study the preference of honeybee to certain crop, we must have a marker that will tell us where the bee visited, because we cannot follow each bee and ask them where you visit, whether you've been in the citrus or you've been in the avocado or in the brassica. And secondly, we need to understand which bees are of interest. Some crop like apple and almond, we interest in pollen collectors, they are main pollinators, but in avocado, we interest mainly in nectar collector, because they move freely between male and female flower, but while pollen collector visit only male flowers. Male flowers. So we focus on nectar collector, and we'd like to see where they visit, whether they visit the avocado flowering or other flowers. So we look for a marker that will tell us those bees visit avocado flowers. And happily, we have a unique marker for avocado nectar, which is called persietol. Mary Lou worked many years ago about this special carbohydrate, while generally in nectar of other plants, we have glucose, fructose, and sucrose. In avocado, we have also persietol, and you can find it only on avocado flowers. No other plant produce persietol in its nectar. So when we collect the honey from the colony, the level of persietol indicate for us the percentage of bees that visited the avocado orchards. So we arrange group of colony, and in those groups we replace the queen. Half of the queens were Italian, and half of them were New World Carniolan from the state, from Susan Kobe breeding project. And we had 4 locations in the northern part of Israel and 2 locations in the southern part. And we compared the level of persietol in the honey of colonies that were placed in avocado orchards. And we've been at the beginning very happy with the result. You can see here dramatic increase, exactly like Reuven Hofshi said, that the New World Carniolan prefer avocado much better than other bee. Italian is a common race of bee in Israel, in the state and other countries. And you can see a huge difference in most of the sites in the level of persietol in the honey of the beehives located. The beehive brought in the same day for the same location, and you can see much more avocado honey in the New World Carniolan colony comparing to the Italian colony. So we were very happy with this kind of solution. But we continue to the southern part of Israel, and we were, sadly, the results were opposite. The Italian bees prefer the avocado more than the New World Carniolan. So it seems that there is kind of interaction between genetic and environment here. We also tested several colony 2 years. The colonies that have high performance with hyperceatol, we checked them for second year and they kept the performance, and we even succeeded to start to breed bee with better preference, but it consumes a lot of effort, and nowadays, at least in Israel, we do not use bees, honeybees that prefer avocado. Okay, so that was the story of what we have done in the past, and what the situation today with the New World Carniolan. The last topic is not exactly study, but it just to share with you a little bit about what happened in Israel along the years regarding the combination of pollenizer in the avocado orchards. So Mary Lou spoke about the flowers of avocado and about the combination of two flowering groups in the same orchard. One of the topics that confuse many people, we need to combine pollenizers. So when we combine pollenizer, many times the grower thinks, so it's a crop that's self-incompatible. It's need cross-pollination, like in almond, but this is not the case in avocado. In avocado, the pollen can germinate, self-pollen can germinate and can fertilize very well the ovule. But there is big advantage of cross-pollinated progeny if we have stress. And generally, if we have abiotic stress, then the self-fruitlet will shut down, will fall down, and the cross-pollinated one will stay on the plant. This is what we call the inbreeding depression. There is advantage of survival for the cross-pollinated fruitlet. So this is the main reason why we combine pollenizers in avocado orchards. But let's try to go a little bit into how the bee is foraging in our orchard. So the bee going out from the hive and start to visit a tree. In our case, this is a pollenizer, let's say Ettinger, and start to move between flowers, and generally they fly to adjacent flowers, so they will not waste energy. And most of the bee can have all their load from one tree and can go back to the hive. Very few bees that visited the pollenizer when it was in the male stage move to the husk, move to the main variety. Their body covered with pollen, and then they are doing cross-pollination at the beginning. And those are the movements that we need. So one of the questions is how to get higher proportion of those movements between the variety. And here, the issue of how to combine pollenizer is very, very critical. So at the beginning, let's say 40 years ago, this was a common way to combine pollenizer in husk orchard in Israel. We had Ettinger at the end of the row. The idea was that it will provide pollen and also be like a windbreak. But when they start to look for the yield inside this orchard and with a genetic marker, they found, this was one of the experimental orchards, they found that there is strong reduction in yield in the rows that far away from the pollenizer, and it's easy to understand. If we understand the way that the bee fly in the orchard, we can understand that generally they will fly to adjacent row or to 2 rows from the pollenizer, but not more than that. Therefore, if we're looking inside in the middle of the orchard, only a very limited number of bees will reach this place with foreign pollen on their body, and therefore there is strong reduction inside those orchards. So grower moved slowly into this method of 4 rows of husk and 1 or 2 rows of Ettinger. So this separate the variety in different rows. There are 2 problems with this system. One, is that the proportion of pollenizer is relatively high, 1/5 of the orchard. And secondly, many times the inner rows suffer from a low level of cross-pollination. So nowadays, the common way to combine pollenizer is this system, 1 to 9. Every tree here see pollenizer in its 3 sides. So it can receive a lot of pollen, foreign pollen. And the proportion in the orchard is lower than I mentioned earlier. And generally, we would like to maximize the proportion of Hass in our orchard. So this is the common situation now in Israel. Okay, I would like to thank all my collaborators and agencies that support those studies, and to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnon. That was very interesting. So if any of you have any questions that you want to ask within chat, make sure you put those questions in chat, and perhaps Arnon can answer them while Rafi is speaking, or we can ask those questions during the question and answer period.